And today we're going to look at something that took place this last week that for some of us perhaps riveted us to the TV and to the internet to see what the results would be of the elections in Israel. This was on Tuesday, and for the first time in Israel's history, it is absolutely undecided. It basically comes down to one of two of these candidates, Tzipi Livni, or you might be more familiar with Benjamin Netanyahu. And it's going to be decided based on who is able to form a government with the required number of seats in their party. voanews.com had an interesting article with the headline reading, "Final Israeli election results bring political uncertainty." This is really interesting. This was on just Friday. Final results have been announced in Israeli elections that took place on Tuesday, but the tally has left Israel in political uncertainty. In the final results, centrist Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni's Kadima party won 28 seats in Israel's 120-member Knesset or parliament. Benjamin Netanyahu's nationalistic Likud party came in a close second with 27 seats. Nevertheless, Ms. Livni could become the first winner of an Israeli election who could not form a government. You have to understand, in Israel, it's very different than in the United States. And this is for prime minister, not president. Now, does the prime minister supersede the president? In some respects, yes, and the president may have to actually appoint the prime minister. It's weird. Anyway, the right wing led by Mr. Netanyahu controls the Knesset, so he is emerging as the likely candidate to form the next government and become prime minister. With such a close outcome, both leaders were vying for President Shimon Peres, does that name sound familiar? To nominate them as prime minister, which he will do only after consulting with political party leaders next week. He has a week to designate someone from the moment final results are published in the official gazette on February 18th. Most observers believe if Mr. Netanyahu gets the nod, that could throw a wrench into U.S.-sponsored peace talks. Understand that Netanyahu is hawkish and our newly elected president is dovish. Therein lies the problem and the wrench that they're talking about. The article goes on to say Mr. Netanyahu and his allies oppose the cornerstone of American Middle-East policy, the creation of a Palestinian state. Well, I think there's going to be a clash. You think? That's not in the article, that's my insertion. I mean, the clash is almost inevitable, says Israeli analyst Gadi Wolfsfeld. I mean, the United States is moving in one direction with Barack Obama, and Israel's moving in the opposite direction with Bibi Netanyahu. Now, would you believe that is exactly what we see, or maybe better said, don't see in the pages of Holy Writ? What don't we see in Bible prophecy? We don't see the United States supporting Israel. Listen, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, all right? But call me silly, but this seems to be a fulfillment of what we see in the scriptures, doesn't it? The direction the United States is going. We've already turned our back on God, and now we're going to turn our back on Israel because we turn our back on the God of Israel. What do you think about Genesis 12? Any nation who blesses Israel will be blessed, and any nation who curses Israel will be cursed. I fear for America. I fear for the direction of this country. We have turned our back on God. We want nothing to do with God. We have kicked God out of this country. We've said, God, go away. We don't want you in our schools. We don't want you in our court system. We surely don't want you in government anymore as you once were and he once was. And now I fear it, but I even wonder, have we kicked God out of our church? You know, I'm haunted by Revelation chapter 3 in that seventh letter to the seventh of seven churches, the church of Laodicea. It's the lukewarm church. It's the last church. It's the church that Jesus said, I wish you were either hot or cold, because you are neither. I want to vomit you out of my mouth. It's the church that Jesus is standing on the outside of, knocking to get in. Let me come in, please. I want to sup with you and you with me, implying that he's not in the church. He's been kicked out of the church, and he's knocking on the door of the church to get back into the church. Have we kicked God out of the church now? I wonder. So where does it all lead? If Netanyahu is given the nod, as the article says, you will basically see, like never before, a relationship between the United States and Israel that will be virtually non-existent. Oh, you'll hear the rhetoric, the propaganda, I guess you might say. But that's all it's going to be. It's not going to be anything resembling any support that has been heretofore for Israel. Now, you put a Netanyahu in there, and I hope he wins. Interesting, I can say that about Israel's elections. I cannot say that about our own United States elections because of the separation of church and state. I better be careful. This is going to go on radio and TV and the internet. I'll tell you why. Because Netanyahu, I think, learned his lesson the last time he was prime minister. I also personally believe that Netanyahu has surrounded around him, close in proximity to him, many believers who have spoken into his life subsequent to him being a prime minister. They have given him a word of knowledge. The word of knowledge, and this is years ago, was that you will be prime minister again, but don't try to divide Jerusalem. See, that was his mistake when Clinton was president. He tried to mess with Jerusalem. He disobeyed what God said. And really, that's the prophecy in Zechariah chapter 14 and the prophecy in Zechariah chapter 12. So I think he learned his lesson. Now, Lord willing, if he's appointed and forms the government and becomes the prime minister again, I think that you're going to see some astonishing changes, seemingly overnight, with the stroke of the prophetic pen, so to speak. This poses an enormous problem for this current administration. See, Livni is more dovish and would be more forgiving of a dovish U.S. president. Some believe that she, with Olmert's green light, launched this offensive in Gaza to sort of show her, hawkish side, as if there was one. It was a political stunt. And as soon as she did, she surged in the polls. Prior to that Gaza offensive in December, Netanyahu was leading in the polls significantly. And the dynamics changed almost overnight. So now that's why it's such a close race. And actually, that's why she was able to acquire the 28 seats, beating Netanyahu by just one. Now, you might be saying, well, listen, what does this have to do with us? Oh, everything. Everything. See, I believe that in the United States of America, we are living in the residual blessing of God because we blessed Israel. If we remove our support from Israel, we cannot ask for God's blessing on America. Even in the singing of that song, God bless America, it might be disingenuous at best. How can God bless America?